Hello everyone and good evening, and today I have Jonathan with me today. How are you, Jonathan?
Good.
That's good. Good to have you with us today as well. Today we're going to touch on a very nice topic, which is good and evil. So I'm sure you're all wondering, we're all, in favor of good, but why does evil exist is a question that's been burning humanity for thousands of years. And we're always trying to reconcile this difference in nature, because we're looking at life and nature generally, how balanced it is, and we can't seem to reconcile why we're so evil and so bad, simply because, let's see if my microphone, yes, is on, because there's so many also bad things in life. And if nature is so perfect, so great, why is there a need for evil? Why is there a need for bad to happen? Well, in our previous lessons, we touched on this topic a little bit, and we talked about humanity's development. And let's just do a little recap on that one. Okay, we discussed that humanity's egoism has been developing for thousands of centuries, thousands of years actually. Quite a few, hundreds of thousands of years. It has been developing, and we've come to the 21st century. And in the 21st century here, all right, we can see that humanity's egoism is just like at its pinnacle, and we just don't know what to do with ourselves anymore. And over the centuries, or hundreds of thousands of years, what has really happened is humanity has just developed via the ego, because ego is actually a pushing force. It's the force that wants to get more out of life. So it's been pushing humanity to get more out of life, because our nature actually is to want more and more. It's our nature, and we just can't help ourselves. We just cannot help ourselves. So from the times of human development, ever since we came down from the trees and started walking on our two legs, and the human species started to develop and evolve, our egoistic development has brought us to develop societies, to develop money, power, science, and also here family, science. And now we've come to such a state in the 21st century that the world is at the verge of collapse, ecologically, politically, economically, socially, family-wise, personal-wise as well. In fact, personally, family-wise, society-wise, country-wise, internationally, with all the global events that are happening with all the nations on the planet, we are at a pinnacle of, well, we're beginning to be at the pinnacle of chaos. And as you can see around the world, we just have a lot of problems, and nothing is really working out for humanity, is it? Because the more we've developed, actually what has happened is we have wanted to become happier, but in essence, we've become more miserable. And this is why, even though we're going through the pinnacle of human development, depression is at the highest level, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, violence, racism, all kinds of things that are bad are just occurring around the world. Radical religion, radical religionism, right? Radical beliefs. The ecology is not giving us any room to maneuver anymore. We're getting earthquakes. We're getting all kinds of flooding all around the world. So we're getting landslides, fires, tornadoes. Even if we did everything great, it's like the ecology is not leaving us alone with all the mess that we're in. So as humanity developed for thousands of years, trying to find that pinnacle of development and happiness, we've come to the pinnacle of misery and not knowing where to go forward anymore. Simply because science is pretty much at a dead end. There's nothing much more to discover. We've made the oceans an ocean of plastic. The space is full of junk. All those satellites, hundreds and thousands of them, we don't know what's going to fall on our head tomorrow from the skies. And also socially, as a person, as a human being, we're going through a lot of dramas in our work, with our relationships with people, in our relationships with family, friends. And in fact, we've come to a state where we begin to isolate ourselves more and more, and we're actually living inside a smartphone now. Okay, and that is what our life has come to, unfortunately, and that has really brought us down into misery. But one thing good about it, because in everything where there is something bad, there has to be something good, okay? And that's what we're going to study today. Right? So we're going to look at good and bad, why they both must exist. And simply because we are going through this miserable state, we're beginning to ask ourselves the question, well, we did everything as humanity to develop nicely, but why can't we be happy still? We have everything. It's not like we're lacking food. It's not like we're lacking housing or homes or whatever. Simply we just are incapacitated to share and to make everybody happy. All right. So, and we just don't understand why we just can't do that. All right. So this is why we're miserable and we don't know what to do with ourselves. And this bad state has to be discovered by humanity, which actually scientists, social scientists, politicians, economists are now discovering. They're saying we can't carry on with this economic model because we're just going to eat ourselves up pretty soon. Okay, the whole environment is just pretty much chaotic now. In fact, everything we do to make the environment even better makes it even worse. Okay, I'll give you a really good example on that. For example, electric cars. Right? When electric cars were beginning to get to, everybody was like, great, you know, we don't have to burn fossil fuel anymore. Well, if you knew how much copper we had to dig out from the earth and how much of pockets of holes we were doing in the earth to make those batteries from copper, and how much in Africa kids were working in those mines, we'd be pretty shocked. Okay, what we're going to see as we move further and further into the future, that nothing that humanity is doing will bring it benefit, except to start to understand human nature and how to be adapted to a good nature, which is actually laws of nature. And until we begin to reconcile those two opposite ends, our bad nature and nature's good nature, we will not be able to find peace. And pretty soon we might even end up with wars. We're already in this economic war now, aren't we? Between the East and the West. Now we have this economic war. People are fighting for their economic rights for their countries, which they don't understand that every country is dependent on each other. So you put tariffs on one country, you're actually affecting the whole planet. You take tariffs away, you're affecting the whole planet. And whatever they do, whatever agreement they come to, I can bet you, even though I don't do any betting, that it's not going to make things any better. All right? Because what's good for one person, as long as it doesn't benefit the other person equally as well, will never end up with something good. And in fact, we never have. And this is why we had World War I, World War II, and all the other conflicts on the planet. Simply because one party wants more benefit than the other. All right? So today we're going to check what we can do about all that. And we're going to start by reading a little article from Baal HaSulam and his article called The Peace. Now, if you do have any questions, please feel free to write them down, and you can also send them to us with an email. And if you wish to know what the email is, we'll write that down for you in a moment. But let's read in the meantime from the article Peace from the book Kabbalah for the Student Writings of Baal HaSulam. Let us take the making of a human being as an example. Providence has very wisely secured a safe place for it, which qualifies it to receive life. Providence also gives it its daily bread in the exact amount, and it also prepares a wonderful foundation for it in the mother's womb so that no stranger may harm it. It tends to its every need like a trained nanny who will not forget it even for a moment, until it has acquired the strength to emerge into our world. At that time, Providence briefly lends it just enough strength to break the walls that surround it, and like a trained armed warrior, it breaks an opening and emerges in the world. Then too, Providence does not abandon it. Like a loving mother, It brings it to such loving, loyal people it can trust, called mother and father, to assist it through its days of weakness until it grows and is able to sustain itself. As man, so are all the animals, plants, and objects. All are wisely and mercifully cared for to ensure their own existence and the continuation of their species. But those who examine that reality from the perspective of provision and persistence of existence can clearly see great disorder and confusion, as though there were no leader and no guidance. Everyone does that which is right in his own eyes, building himself on the ruin of others. The evil thrive and the righteous are trampled mercilessly. Bear in mind that this oppositeness set before the eyes of every sensible, educated person has preoccupied humanity even in ancient days. And there are many methods to explain these two apparent opposites in providence which occupy the same world. So Balsam is basically telling us this. Listen, when we're first born, we're in our mother's womb and everything is really honky-dory. Everything is lovely. We're not disturbed. We're nicely growing up. Everything is according to our need. We're nice and warm inside our mother's womb. And then we're born into an environment where we have family, and our family takes care of us, and we start to grow up. That's all great. But as we grow up more and more, we begin to discover that life is not so merciful after all. I mean, it was great when we were children because there was nobody really demanding anything from us. But as we grew up more and more and more, life became demanding. We had to start getting things done on our own, start to walk on our own two legs, and start to make our own life and build it and put a lot of effort behind it. And life, as we grow, becomes more harder and harder. So in the previous centuries, for thousands of years, humanity has wondered about this. Why is everything is so good, and all of a sudden we're growing up and it just turns really sour? When we're kids, everything is nice, we're playing. As we grow up, we begin to kill each other. So as kids, we were friends, caring for each other. And as we grew up, what are we doing? We're just, ruining others in order to build our own future. So a lot of philosophers, a lot of people in the past, very smart people, have been pondering on this idea as to, well, how can this minus and opposite really be? How can everything be so great one day and the next day everybody's fighting and killing each other? I mean, we were playing a few years ago, and now, I don't know, we're in the army, our countries are in conflict, or even in business or in social life or whatever. We're trying to be on top of others, and we're really building our future, as he says in the article, upon the ruin of others. So this development in humanity, this change, this shift, is not understood. It's not really a state where humanity's been able to solve it. There's no solution to it. And because there's no solution to it, or they haven't been able to find a solution, there is a solution actually, but they haven't been able to find a solution for it. We've just been it's like a snowball effect, right? You just have a little snowball, roll it down the hill, all of a sudden it comes big, and when it hits you at the bottom of the hill, it just knocks you out. And that's how life has become. And now we're also going through major dramas in society, globally, in global society, which is also indicating to us that we're just unable to reconcile good and bad. We're just not capable of bringing them together, and we're just not capable of balancing things out. All right, so this is humanity's big question. Why is there such a contradiction? Why is there good one day and then the complete opposite and the next day? So let's read a little bit more, try to get our heads around these main points that Balsam is writing. Now, mind you, these articles were written 70, 80, maybe 100 years ago. Okay, so they're a bit old. However, what we need to take from this is a principle that why things are the way they are. Because at the end of the day, what he's teaching us is very relevant because it's relevant to human nature, and human nature existed since humanity existed. So all these principles here, although he wrote them a long time ago, are very relevant. They were relevant 1,000 years ago. They're relevant now. And they were relevant 2,000 years ago. They'll be relevant in another 1,000 years, simply because we need to understand what human nature is. And that's what he's talking about. Okay? So let's read a little bit more. All right, now Bala Sulam divides the categories that humanity came up with in terms of trying to define what our state is. So humanity, has been contemplating, has been meditating on this for hundreds of years, and they came up with certain methods. So Bala Sulam is going to summarize those methods that humanity came up with, and we're going to touch on them, and we're going to explain them a little bit. And then what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Kabbalah and what really good and bad is, and why, and how we need to deal with it, basically. All right. Now, the first method that humanity came up with was a method called nature. All right. And this is also from the same article, the article called Peace. Although the Creator watches over the existence of reality with wondrous wisdom, yet he himself is mindless and does all that senselessly. So people first observed nature, and they looked at nature, and they looked at the existence of reality, and they thought it was just magnificent. Imagine all the details in reality, from all the animals, the plants, the planets, the stars. It is just amazing. Now, they use the word here, creator. Why did they use that? Well, it's not because the Kabbalists want you to believe in a God or anything, but Kabbalists are very pragmatic guys, okay? So they look at the world and they say, well, listen, I didn't create myself, because certainly if I knew what I was going to get into, I would definitely not create myself in this situation, okay? And they're looking at the reality and they're thinking, well, I didn't create this reality either. So me and this reality must have been created by a creator. Now note, they're not using the word God, Allah, Elohim, or whatever. They're not. They're just making a statement. They're saying, well, there must be a creator, because I didn't make this place. Whether with the good or the bad, it wasn't me. So the reason they're using the creator is to kind of underline that there must be a force that made it and is managing it, or has left it on autopilot. So something of that nature, which we'll discover as we study wisdom of Kabbalah, how this all comes together. All right? But in their words, they're very particular and pragmatic, and there's no blind faith here, like you need to go and believe in something. So the word creator here is just a sign for us to understand that some force has created this reality. If there had been any reason and feeling in him, he would certainly not leave such malfunctions in the provision of reality without pity and compassion to the tormented. For this reason, they named him Nature, meaning a mindless, heartless supervisor, and for that reason they believe that there is no one to be angry at, to pray to, or to justify oneself to. Right, so this was the first method they came up with. They said, listen, we're looking at life, and even if I'm going through crazy suffering, there's nothing much I can do about it. There's nobody to turn to. I'm created here. I'm in this society. I'm on this planet. And all the dramas that I'm just going through, a lot of stress and frustrations, and anything can happen the next day. And like, well, what's going on? Okay. So this was the first thing they talked about. So they understood that, listen, there is just no mercy here. All right, we're just living inside nature. This force is called nature, and that's it. There's nobody to turn to, nobody to talk to, nobody to say, listen, what are you doing with my life? You created me. What's going on? Nobody to turn to at all. So they left it alone. And that method was called nature. All right, so that's the first method humanity came up with. Obviously, there are a bunch of methods humanity came up with, but Bala Sulam is categorizing them in four main categories, okay? And laws of nature, and that the way that this system is running as it is, and there's nothing we can do about it, is just one way of looking at creation, and this is what they came up with first. The next thing they came up with is two authorities. There are two supervisors here. One creates and sustains the good, and the other creates and sustains the bad. Okay, so this usually also you find in many teachings as well. For example, karma, there's the good, there's the bad. Or you find it also in religions, the good angel, the bad angel. Okay, such things have been developed by humanity, and the reason they divided it up was not because they're silly or anything, simply because they looked at life. They said, well, there are good stuff and there are bad stuff. There are good things happening, bad things happening. So there must be two forces fighting against each other. So the thing they came up with is rather logical. There must be two forces here, because we see good and we see bad. We feel good or we feel bad. Right? There's a good day and I'm having a bad day. So this is how they said there must be two guys running my life. Like on a horse. Like I'm a horse and they're pulling me around with good and bad on a leash. All right? And this was the second method they came up with. And then they came up with a third method called multiple authorities. They have divided and separated each of the general actions for itself, meaning strength, wealth, domination, beauty, famine, death, disorder, and so on. They appointed each its own supervisor and expanded the system as they wished. So then humanity came up with all kinds of gods for everything. All right, so you can see them in Greek, ancient Greece. They have Greek gods, ancient Rome, Roman gods, all kinds of gods in Egypt, in Persia, in India, you still have them. All right, so humanity created all these gods and they allocated them to certain forces in nature. So if you were, I don't know, all of a sudden there was an earthquake, they related that to some god that was dealing with, I don't know, catastrophes. Okay, so they divided it all up because actually they're not becoming more and more stupid, but as humanity is evolving, they're becoming more sophisticated. They begin to understand that, you know, there are a lot of forces in nature. Actually, when they create these gods from ancient times and so on, they're really attributing things to powers and forces in nature. So they're not really stupid things, they're not imaginary things. They're beginning to understand that there are things in life which influences us, and these are laws of nature, and those laws by us are not controllable. The reason humanity created gods was they looked at life and they said, listen, we can't control this. This is like huge. This is beyond us. So what they did was they allocated gods and they said, listen, there's a special force that's running this thing in life. There's a special force that's running this in life. So they gave them names. So this multiplicity of gods isn't something very naive or foolish, but there's a lot of philosophy and thinking behind it. And there are a lot of people who sat down, who investigated nature and actually identified these forces in nature to kind of give them these definitions. All right. And this is how we developed. We still have these things in nature, all right. Multiplicity of gods doesn't necessarily mean, you know, the god of sun or the god of the moon or the god of the earthquakes or whatever. It can also mean us in our lives as well, when we can't really associate something with our capacity. Which if we are going through something that is beyond us, when we give it some kind of definition, we're also categorizing it as some kind of a force influencing us. So this is what they did. They just categorized forces in nature, and this is something we do as well. Even, for example, let's say today I had a bad experience at work with my boss. All right, let's say my boss really gave me a hard time. Me giving my boss the certain force that he affected me negatively is actually me making some kind of a force out of him, because I'm saying it was he who influenced what happened to me, which is beyond my control. Okay, so we're allocating a lot of things to many things, people, nature, all kinds of things in life, and that is also included in this category. Okay, because whatever is beyond our control, we're basically saying, well, there's a force outside of me that is doing something to me, or that's doing something to influence, impact me. And that's actually the same thing as creating for yourself a God. Okay? And then the last thing they came up with is left his operation. Okay, so people sat down, they talked about what's going on with life, and they finally decided that there was a God who created this place, or a creator who created this place, or nature, some kind of intelligence that created this thing. And then he looked at it and he just said, you know what, I don't like what I did, I'm out of here. Okay? So let's see what Baal Islam writes about that. The fourth one is left his operation. The supervisor of reality is indeed wise and caring, yet because of his exaltedness, which is beyond conception, our world is deemed a grain of sand, nothing in his eyes. It is not worthwhile for him to bother with our petty businesses, and this is why our livelihood is so disordered, and every man does that which is right in his own eyes. So humanity, as life is getting worse and worse, is trying to come up with the reason for the deterioration. Because life is constantly deteriorating. And this is where we're at today, as humanity. And they just can't find an answer to it. Why is life constantly going bad? So they, as human nature is, we like to put the blame on somebody all the time. So what did they do? Well, there was a creator. He was lovely, wonderful, created something really amazing. But he looked at us. So what a bunch of miserable earthlings. I'm not going to be dealing with these little creatures anymore. Just like we don't deal with, I don't know, what do we deal with? We don't deal with the planktons, right? We don't deal with planktons in there unless you're a scientist who's involved in planktons. Why? Because we've got other things to deal with in life, such as our life, right? So unless you're not an environmentalist or someone who's really investigating something biologically, we don't in our normal day-to-day lives start worrying about little molecules or atoms or, I don't know, little cells and stuff like that. Why? Because it's just not what we do. Right? So it's like the creator or whoever created this system, they say we are so irrelevant, and because he's so great and we're so irrelevant, we're just, he just left us alone. And we're stuck here not knowing what to do with ourselves. What do you think about that, Johnny?
Certainly is a challenge.
You're telling me, Johnny. You're telling me. All right. So Baal Islam categorized everything in this manner, and all religions, spiritual beliefs, everything, philosophies are all in these categories. Whenever we define something as a force, that's where religions come in. The good angel, the bad angel, karma, this and that, good, bad, whatever, all these things, philosophies, religions, they're all included in these four phases. And I guess the last one is like, you know what? The last one must be humanity now. I am fed up of thinking about it. I don't want to deal with it. Just leave me alone. I want to have a good life and just go. Okay? So a lot of people actually are depressed because of that. Simply because we're aimless. We're like leaves taken away with the wind from one place to another, not having any control over our lives. We don't know where we're heading. We can't get any pleasure from life anymore. We just don't have the fulfillment that we, as when we were young, were really hoping for. And as life goes forward, as Johnny just said, it is becoming an absolute challenge. And this is why humanity has had to come up with something, because as life was moving forward, they felt it was challenging. It was hard to live. And imagine thousands of years ago, trying to make a living. You don't know, somebody with a sword might come, just chop your head off for the hell of it. You're working all day on your field, somebody comes in, takes everything you got, and you have no future, you got no tomorrow, everything's a big question mark. And now, when everything is not such a big question mark in our modern 21st century life, just imagine how qualitatively we are immersed in this question. Well, I can't find any happiness. Even though we have everything and at least some degree of security, we still cannot find pleasure and happiness and fulfillment. So all these things are humanity's development that bringing us to this conclusion of why there is bad, why things have to be bad. Why can't we just live here like those nice little animals in the forest? They all seem happy, little monkeys running around in the forest and everything. As long as humans don't stick their noses into their lives, all animals are living a nice harmonious life in their forests.
Mutlu, I have a question for you.
Thought you might.
Yeah. I have a friend at work, for example, and spoke to him briefly about Kabbalah, which I don't advise to talk too much to people with work about, because I'm quite involved. He asked questions, and he made a note that this is very esoteric. It's very removed from, as you say, his day-to-day existence and his box about thinking about his job, his wife, his kids, putting food on the table, etc., etc. So my question is, Bala Salam, when writing these articles, who did he gear these articles to?
I think Bala Salam has been writing, as we learned in the wisdom of Kabbalah, that a student that comes to the wisdom of Kabbalah is someone who's seeking a meaning in life. Okay. And he is actually, or she is actually, someone with a very tangible mind. Okay. Has a serious question about the meaning of life, and wants to discover why he or she is living, and wants to discover why he or she is not happy. Because these are deep questions, because our nature wants us to be happy. This is why we're running around all day trying to fulfill ourselves with our lunch breaks, thinking about what we're going to eat, what's the best thing we can eat today to get maximum pleasure, what we're going to do tonight or go out on the weekend and so on. We constantly want to get pleasure because that's our nature, but we have this dilemma where we don't get any pleasure. So we want to ask, so we want to discover through this question what the meaning of life is.
Is it almost like when you got a car and your person who's driving a car, he just cares, or she just cares and going in there, make sure there's gas in the tank, puts it in drive or whatever, and away you go, rather than being sort of the architect of that car and understanding all the component parts, how that car functions, how a car was constructed, why the car's there for us, etc., etc. Is that the right type of analogy? What do you think?
A lot of people also don't really ask about the details about how all this life works, because when we first come to the wisdom of Kabbalah, we're concerned with ourselves.
Right.
So we're not really delving into all the little nooks and crannies in there to discover all the details of reality. However, though, once we begin to understand that we're a part of reality and we're a part of this functioning reality, then that becomes a point of observation that we want to get into, because we're actually, when we discover the wisdom of Kabbalah, what we're actually discovering is our place in reality. Now, once you begin to get into that mode, then it becomes interesting. Initially, when a person comes to study wisdom of Kabbalah, he or she is just concerned about how I can have a better life. Okay? And the wisdom of Kabbalah gives you that, to be honest with you, because the wisdom of Kabbalah gives you the understanding of how and where you can be happy and how and where you cannot be happy. And the way we're living right now, we can't be happy. So the alternative to the bad of our current state is the wisdom of Kabbalah telling us, well, how we can be happy. And this is why evil must exist. Because if evil didn't exist, we would never be able to understand what is bad and what is good, and we'd never be able to search for the good, build the good, and we'd never even understand what we're doing in this reality. We would truly be living like chickens. Just like they're on two legs, we're on two legs. Right? We would not have any difference at all. So humanity, on the one hand, is the smartest of all creatures, and on the other hand, is the most dumbest of all creatures, because he's the only creature that really shoots him or herself in the foot by destroying the planet he or she lives in. We destroy our relationships, our planets, each other. We eat each other up. So on the one hand, we are really intelligent and smart. On the other hand, we use our intelligence so stupidly It is like Einstein said, there may be an end to the universe, but I am not sure if there's an end to the stupidity of humanity.
It's interesting. Rob Laitman just mentioned recently that even at the animal level, they can feel that if you have an animal that you're looking after, a dog, etc., and you're depressed, the dog you'll feel your emotions as well, because there's connection there, and it will also impact on their mood, and they will also get depressed, etc. And it's the same with the still level.
Absolutely.
I'm sure they feel the animals out there and how they feeling emotionally and internally, for a better word, and it affects all the levels of nature, as we know, are connected together, and man itself is the
cause of every problem on the planet.
Every problem.
So when you get into,
and we don't realize how significant our behavior is.
Exactly, because we're not conscious.
Right.
So when you come to the wisdom of Kabbalah, you begin to develop this consciousness, and the intricacies of that consciousness, as you delve into the study more and more, become very interesting for you, because you discover yourself. And the discovery of yourself in this reality is what the wisdom of Kabbalah is really all about, because from that discovery you have the opportunity to build something above this perception of reality. So it really has the ability to bring you out of your current form to a higher level of consciousness, where you can exist in that higher level of consciousness in a more perfect state. By discovering what our current state is, we can build an amazing new higher level of consciousness, which we were actually created to attain. Any questions up to here? No?
Not any as such.
Not any as such. All right, so let's read a little bit more.
Besides the ones I asked.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad you're asking. I was beginning to get lonely. All right, so let's read a little bit more and see where we're at. Okay. Now, Kabbalah explains to us the general laws of nature. When it does, it also explains to us human nature as well. So on the one hand, there's humanity, there's our nature, and on the other hand, there's the nature which is in nature. So there are laws of nature in nature, the way they act and behave. This is the animate, the vegetative, and the still level. And there is us, our human nature. Now, in previous lessons, you learnt that our nature is a desire to receive, right? So we are a desire to receive. Okay, so this is our nature. We want to have some fun. Okay, so we're a desire to receive pleasure. This is by default. Everybody is running around trying to get pleasure every day, all day, every second of their life. That's just how it is. We are even willing to suffer at this current moment for a future pleasure which we anticipate is worth more than the suffering I'm going through right now. So all we want is to have pleasure. All right? There was even a song about that, wasn't it? Girls just want to have fun. All right. Unfortunately, all men also want to have fun. Girls, we're not going to leave you alone there. So all of us want to have some fun, and this is what it's all about. We are a desire to get pleasure all the time, and the problem is pleasure and desire, they cancel each other out. So we're always left with a minus. Why? Because I spent time, money, effort, got stressed out about trying to get what I wanted, and when I got it, the pleasure fleeted away. The pleasure just evaporated. If you buy a new car, according to research, after 3 months, the pleasure from the car is completely gone. If you buy a really nice car like a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, you get pleasure not from the car, but you get pleasure because in traffic, the guy next to you doesn't have such a good car. Can you see how crazy we are? Okay. So that is the kind of state that we, humanity, are in. And because this formula is fixed, it's a lost game from the beginning. So we can never ever get pleasure on a continuous basis as long as we're going to fill ourselves with materiality, corporeality, or these kind of things. We are just not created for this stuff. Unfortunately, we think we are, but we are not. But this is not a bad thing, simply because going through this vicious cycle of constantly running, like a dog running after its tail, we get to a point where the suffering is so big, then we start asking the questions, please, somebody tell me why I'm living. All right? And that's it. This question now pops up. If it pops up in you, if you're asking why you're living, what's the meaning of your life, why are we living, we're going to die pretty soon, all for what? And all that, if that's coming up in you, then you've probably got a strong dot in the heart which you need to work on, so that you can actually rise above this level and find that fulfillment at the next level of human development, which we all have to get there. So let's read a little bit more about these laws of nature that we're supposed to adapt ourselves to. Once again, I'm reading from the article Peace. To avoid having to use both tongues from now on, nature and a supervisor, between which, as I have shown, there is no difference regarding the following of the laws, it is best for us to meet halfway and accept the words of the Kabbalists that nature is the same thing as God. Then I will be able to call the laws of God nature's commandments or nature's laws, or vice versa. So Bala Islam says, listen, whether you believe in God, whether you don't, it's really irrelevant, okay? Because what exists are the laws of nature. So whether you call it God with his laws as in nature, or whether you call it nature with nature's laws, it doesn't matter, because how you name it doesn't change the functionality of existence, or how existence and creation really works out. So what difference does it make whether one of us calls it a God, or the other one says, well, listen, mate, it's nature? It's the same thing. And laws in nature are unbendable. They do not compromise. You can't change them. You can't bend them. If you're in your 20s and you know about the law of gravity, if you fall from the 10th floor, you will die. If a baby falls, he or she has no idea about the laws of gravity. Believe me, he or she will die as well. These laws are unchanging, unbending. And we must learn them so that we can adapt ourselves to these laws in order to find that balance which we are not currently feeling. Okay, now what's more important is nature's law that govern society. Now this is very interesting, because when we look at nature, we're really talking about the animate, the vegetative, and the still level. But how can these laws in nature really apply to us as humans? Because our nature is different. So how can we apply laws of nature, like, I don't know, like gravity or some other law in nature, into our existence? That doesn't really reconcile. That doesn't really match. I want to do things according to how I want to do them. And nature does things according to how nature does them. And really, I don't have any power on nature. And it doesn't look like nature has any power on me, because I'm doing whatever I want to do, seemingly at least. And from these two conflicting forces in nature, we're coming now slightly to an understanding that our nature is really opposite the laws of nature, and we really need to balance them out. But because humanity is 8 billion people, isn't that nice, Jonathan? 8 billion. What are we going to do with 8 billion people? How to transform 8 billion people so that they can become we can attain a higher level of consciousness is a big fat question mark. But at least we can start with what we have, which is currently you, me, and the people who are watching, Johnny. All right, you'll be happy to know that actually we have a lot of friends from around the world who study as well. So if you wish to study, there's a lot of room for you to come and study. So let's read a little bit more to discover how laws of nature are really also should be governing our social interaction as human society. Once again, let's read from the Peace article. In general examination, we find that there are only 2 commandments or 2 laws in society. These can be called reception and bestowal. So give and take, right? These are the 2 laws in society. This means that each member must by nature receive his needs from society and must benefit society through his work for its well-being. And if one breaks one of these commandments, he will be mercilessly punished. Now this we can understand. All of us have a job when we grow up. What does that mean? It means I contribute to society through my job, and I also go to the supermarket, buy my food, go to the shopping mall, buy my clothes, or go on a holiday, do whatever I want to do with the money I made, and I'm also getting my livelihood from society. So this law exists and we're living in it. Maybe we're not conscious about it, but society works on give and take. So how much I give and how much I take need to be balanced out. And it's this lack of balance that's really rocking the boat in stormy waters. Because we want to take. And when it comes to giving, well, not really want to give. Okay, because that's human nature. But by default, if you look at life and nature, society as well, okay, we're now working in some company, but if some farmer was not working to make our food, then what are we going to eat? So the farmer is working for the crops. The other company is raising cattle or chickens or whatever for the eggs and the meat. And some other persons, growing cotton for the clothes. Some other country, some other places making the clothes. So as you can see, everything around the world is kind of like interconnected. So somebody's making the cars, somebody's making the trains. We're all contributing one way or another into society, and we're getting our livelihood, our existence from society. This law exists, and we're in it, whether we like it or not. So let's see what else he says. In the same article, what we need to know here is in the last sentence, he says, if we do not obey this commandment of give and take, this law in nature of give and take, we're going to get hammered. So he says, laws of nature will punish us mercilessly. This is what we see in ecology. All of a sudden, you're getting tsunamis, flooding, all kinds of tornadoes, wildfires. Why? Why all of a sudden? Why wasn't there so much in previous years? Why now they're flooding all over the place? Maybe you don't know, but if you go onto the internet and look for natural disasters month by month, you will be shocked what's going on the planet. It's just that we don't see it on the news. You will be shocked. There is something going bad everywhere, all right, ecologically. So we're not keeping this balance, and it is affecting all levels of existence, all right? Let's take a look at what else he's saying. We need not excessively examine the commandment of reception, since the punishment is carried out immediately, which prevents any neglect. Okay, so if I take more than I deserve, so if I go and steal, for example, and they catch me, what happens? I go to jail, or I get a fine. So if I take more than what I need to take, society puts me in my place. It says, listen, you can't do that. Okay? So that is for sure, we're going to get nailed on as soon as we're caught or as soon as we do something wrong. Also at the office as well. If I'm not putting my effort into it, what are they going to say? They're going to say, listen, you're not giving enough. All right? You're not giving enough for what you're taking from us, and we're going to have to let you go. Same thing at work. It's the law in nature. But in the other one, in the other commandment, or in the other law in nature, that of bestowal, of giving upon society, not only is the punishment not immediate, but it is given indirectly. Therefore, this commandment is not properly observed. Now, this is really interesting, because Baha'u'llah Islam says, listen, although you know you're taking what you need to take from society, but if you do not give, you're going to get hit. Imagine where karma comes from, right? Or what goes around comes around, right? That's a famous English saying. What goes around comes around. You do something bad, it's going to come back and bite you sooner or later. You just don't know when. And because you don't know when, and because we don't like to think about bad things that are going to happen, we like to take things now and think we're going to have a great time with it. So this punishment in nature is untimely for us. We don't know when it's going to happen. So when humanity is taking more and more and more than it should be, it's going to come back and bite them. And this is what ecology is showing us right now. Okay? And we're going to be seeing all kinds of diseases as well soon, which are popping up. Animals are going extinct. Okay, they're just disappearing. Every year something is disappearing. So a lot of animals are disappearing. And we're cutting down forests. We're just destroying everything. Why? Because humanity wants to keep taking. Now we're also taking from each other, not just from the world. Okay? So we're taking more and more from the world, which means that there are very few rich people with a lot of money and they don't know what to do with it. Okay, so you have a lot of billionaires and they don't know what to do with their money. It's just sitting there. Okay, you cannot live your life out spending even that money if you're spending millions every day. Okay, so that's sitting there somewhere. And then you got the majority of the people who are really suffering. Okay, they're poor, they can't make their daily bread, and so on. Okay, so when somebody's taking more than their share and the others are suffering, it's gonna come back. Sooner or later, something's got to give, and balance needs to be maintained. And this is what nature is really good at. Okay? Because if we can't balance ourselves out, laws of nature are balancing us out. Okay? With all these disasters, ecological, also human nature as well. Now, if you look at the news, everybody's a bit uneasy about all kinds of conflicts that can happen. Conflicts in the Middle East, conflicts in Asia. Everybody's sitting on a cactus right now, okay? Because we don't know what's going on, and there's a lot of aggression between countries as well. Okay, so if we don't balance ourselves out, nature will. It will push us and it will knock us out. Okay, and that could be through not just ecological stuff, also throughout wars as well. Because what is a war? At the end of the day, a war is a really bad situation where nature is giving us a reformat. It's doing a reboot. Okay, you guys have gone haywire. We're going to have to reboot you, and they pressed a button, which is nature pressing our buttons, and that's it. Shut down. Reboot, and hope it works better next time. That's what's going on. Okay, so humanity also is being grinded by life's event.
Mutlu, if I just ask, in terms of relationships, like work relationships, family relationships, between husband and wife, or etc., how important is this notion of give and take? Before, in the past, and I'm still seeing it a lot today, it's like this me versus you type of mentality or focus, and it's destroying a lot of people. I actually got an email today where where I work, and this particular person tried to blow me out of the water. Whereas it's saying that I wasn't, like, in a sense, working against her, in inverted commas. I happened to be a woman, but doesn't matter. And at the end, I wrote an email saying I had everything documented that I'm there just to serve you. I didn't get an email back. And she sort of put me out there in front of a whole bunch of people. And I just put everything on the table, saying everything was open, transparent, and I'm here just to help you. And we're a team. And it seems like people still are having difficulty coming to the grips of this, going from the me versus you paradigm to the we paradigm.
Well, it is simply because we're individualistic creatures, John, and our egoism is growing every day. We need to understand that egoism doesn't just stay there; it grows every day, and we're evolving every day. So this evolution and this growth of ego is like a volcano. You never know when somebody's going to pop up at you. It could be your wife, your work colleagues, or somebody in traffic. You know, it could be anyone, anything, any day. It could be. We hear a lot of stories of shootings and stuff in schools. Why? Because this ego is just all of a sudden coming out, and this pressure in society is like a pressure cooker.
So you think we're going to uncontrollable stages of exponential growth of the ego?
Absolutely. It is uncontrollable. This is why people have all of a sudden fits. They all of a sudden burst out because they can't reconcile their emotions with their mind. They can't reconcile the pressures of life and why things are going sour intellectually. And this is where Kabbalah plays a good role, actually, because whatever you're going through, you can reconcile your state intellectually, which allows you to balance yourself out. Because once you're inside this emotional state, the emotion takes over you. And when that happens, your mind is dysfunctional. All of a sudden, your mind's just not working because you're in this emotional state. And because humanity doesn't understand why this unbalance is occurring, then you have all kinds of dramas. Even wars break out like this because you got some guy with ginger hair and some other guy with black hair on the other side of the planet who's a little short and chubby, and he just wants to press a button. And the other guy said, "Well, make my day," as if both of them are going to have a great day afterwards. They think it's fireworks. The whole planet is about to blow. So this is all an emotional state. This is where egos are conflicting. And because humanity doesn't understand why this egoism is bringing us to conflict, we're going through problems with our friends, family, colleagues, politics, all kinds of things. Okay. What we have to understand in human society is just like nature is a connected system. We have to understand that humanity is also a connected system, and that all of us, 8 billion people, need to understand that we're dependent on each other. I'll tell you why also, very, very simple. If you have a bunch of people who are really, really well off, and you have a bunch of, you got more people who are not well off, the not well off are going to make a revolution like they did thousands of years ago. They did it many times. The French Revolution is like one of them. The Russian Communist Revolution is the other one, because you get to a certain point where the suffering is unbearable and humanity will then hit the violent button, and they'll try to get out of the state through a revolution or a war, and that's called a very bloody bad situation. So the whole of humanity needs to understand this is higher level of consciousness, and that's where we start with the individual. We start to first understand ourselves and of our place in life, and by that what we actually do is have an influence on others in a positive way. And if we don't do that, the world will just keep getting worse and worse. So what we're doing is, as we study the wisdom of Kabbalah, we're creating these little ripples that engulf everybody, and it affects everybody. Because if you have one positive change in you, because we're all in the same system, that positive attitude, that positive change in you towards everybody else in society is actually causing a chain reaction for the better on the whole planet, even though we don't see it. Okay, even though we don't see. So even if you're now watching this lesson, you begin to understand that the ego is making all these problems between humans, between us in society, and that we need to somehow overcome this and be more considerate, and instead of me, start to think about more about giving and doing good to other people, because if I do good to others, it's actually good for me. If I begin to understand that doing good to other people is doing good to me, it's doing good to my children, my family, my loved ones, I do more of it. Right now, we think taking more is doing good for me and my family and so on, and it's not. This is why you have a lot of children who come from rich families and are there on drugs and alcohol and depression. Why? Because it's not about the materiality you provide to the family, but it's about what you provide to the planet. So when you're giving more, you're actually becoming a vital part of reality, causing good, and that good is coming back to you. And this is how it works in an integral system. Everything is really connected one with the other. So there's really no escape for anybody's bad action not to come back and hit him. One way or another, this is going to happen. So what we all have to do, and life will push us to do this, because we have to understand, guys, that there is a purpose to life. We're not just living on this planet to have a great life like a monkey in a forest and end up dead. That is not the purpose for the creation of humanity. Humanity's existence is to raise it to a higher level of existence and consciousness beyond this corporeal level. And if we don't get it, and if we don't do it, and if we don't study to achieve it, then life will push us through immense suffering. And life has not had any it's not had any less of that in the past. Life will constantly push us through suffering, whether individual suffering or social suffering or continental or global suffering. This is going to happen.
So, Mudlu, my question to you is, I've been reading quite a lot about this, there's a lot of these topics, and you see that the level of depression is the highest that has been in history. You see among young kids in Australia, where we're from, between the ages of 18 to 28, in males it's the highest suicide rate in the world. Young teenage suicide and depression in the States is very, very high, etc. And I've been reading a lot, and it seems like the way that they see that the solution is that like putting a band-aid over a wound. Okay, through different programs, self-help systems, therapy, etc. Well, my question is to you is that there still seems to be a gap between the solutions of this world and what the Kabbalists say. Mm-hmm. How do we reconcile that gap? I mean, this is the challenge that we face in giving the message of Kabbalah out to the rest of humanity.
Well, it's a weird. When you think about it, it's weird because we're such a small group of people when you consider it to the population of the world. But like I said here, the world is integral. If you have a small group of people who study,
right,
who want to create change, you can actually influence the whole world. And this we can also see in our lives as well. If you look at the French Revolution, it's just started by a bunch of guys. If you look at the Russian one, it was just started by, Karl Marx wrote one book, and a few people who took the idea, just a handful, took the whole, half the world, made it communist.
Right.
Also the Renaissance, also any revolution, it starts with the fundamental ideology of a few people. And what happens is, as humanity is suffering more and more, I think the ideology is then picked up. Okay? When also humanity needs to hit this state where what we're doing is not working. So the more they look at life and the way, the more they see that what they're doing is not working, they're hitting a wall all the time, it will allow them to start searching for more things. Also, we have to take, obviously, the challenge of helping the world. This is why also our lectures are all free on YouTube. You can watch them all free. We do our best to try to raise the level of human consciousness, simply because we want the world to understand that we're all connected. And if I do something bad to you, it's actually doing bad to myself. So all of us need to start to understand that our ecology, our society, our children, our future, our personal future, the good of our personal future actually depends on the good relationships that we have with each other, which is exactly why the laws in nature are so balanced out. The animals, the plants, and the stilla, they're all balanced out. They don't have chaos. We have chaos. Why? Because we do not understand these laws. And we need to balance ourselves out. And the way to balance ourselves out in society is to start being good towards each other. And if we start building this good relationship towards each other, we'll begin to see that we're more, we're more happy and relaxed and more confident towards life. Because I don't constantly have people running around trying to stab me in the back for something. Okay. And this is what an environment needs to provide for all of us. So Kabbalah is very, very, it's a very solid science. It's a social science, actually, about how we need to organize ourselves as a society to really connect with each other, and through that connection discover something which is opposite our nature, which is to give rather than to take. And that giving actually allows the person to integrate the sensation of what is in nature, which we currently do not feel. Because our life is so limited to taking. I can only fill myself up so much. But in giving, what you can fill up is endless. And we really need to get our heads around this little, this switch in our mentality. And if we can do that, you'll begin to understand that life is very fulfilling and is great, actually. And on that positive tone, we've come to pretty much the end of our lesson. But what I wanted to note here was that all of humanity is connected. And because all of us are connected to each other, what we must do is have a good connection. Just like in nature, if the parts of nature are not connected properly, there are all kinds of ecological disasters, problems. Humanity also needs to connect in a way that we're all mutually responsible, caring, and thinking about the welfare and the well-being of everyone. If we fail to do this, if we're constantly, thinking about myself and me and so on, then this is not going to work out for humanity, and the only thing that will happen is another third world war. We'll just have another world war, and God knows what will happen afterwards. Okay? But at the end of the day, humanity is not left with a lot of choices, simply because we're all connected whether we like it or not. And if we understand this, we can actually be really happy about it. Because imagine if you have people who are like family all around you. Why? Because they understand this subtle law in nature, that what is good for other people is actually good for me. And if I begin to understand this concept, start relating to the world in such a way, then I can actually have a chance to grasp happiness. And like people say, even if you want to get out of depression, they say start doing good things to other people, because it really does fix your depression. Okay, so there's a bit of a tip for you. Now, in our next lesson, lesson number 15 will be next lesson. We'll be talking about how to discover the single force of love acting in every life situation. Now, this lesson is very important, because just like we talked about now, we don't understand the force that's acting on us. And because we don't understand this force that is acting on us, our life is a bit miserable. Now that we understood in this lesson how we're connected and what kind of a change we should start to look at going through, instead of just thinking about myself and to think about the whole system. Now what we're going to study next lesson is how this force of nature is working in this system and is influencing me. Now, although it says the single force of love, okay, this is not a hippie topic, okay? Love is a trait. It is a force because it creates an action which is dependent on the trait of love. So we're not talking about some kind of a romantic Hollywood movie. Because love is a trait, it has the force to make an influence, just like hate, okay? It's a trait. If you act through hate, you make some kind of an influence. If you act through love, you make some kind of an influence. So we need to start looking at life now through different glasses. We need to start to understand that this concept of love is a force that impacts us and causes inside of us all kinds of changes. And it is the force that is acting in nature, which is influencing us. And if we don't adapt ourselves to how it's operating, we're always going to be in a terrible fight in our lives towards life and towards others as well. So hopefully you'll join us in our next lesson. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to send them on our emails. And that's about it. So next week, hopefully we'll all be together again. Have a great evening or day, depending where you are. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.